So we often get asked why we bother going through the efforts to boondock and get out into the wilderness. And the answer for us is really quite straightforward. We're landscape photographers, and for us, this being our view in the morning or in the evening is all the reason we really need to get out and boondock. Hi folks.
Hi folks.
How are you tonight?
We're doing well, and we're out boondocking tonight.
It's something we do actually quite a bit, and we've just recently left Las Vegas for a 3-month trip, which is going to be mostly boondocking.
We find a number of places that are convenient to boondock when we're traveling in the Southwest, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Idaho, Utah. And a majority of these places have 3 or 4 different types of boondocking locations you can use. Today we're in probably BLM land. We have some cows in the distance, so we seem to be in some open range land.
Yeah, actually the title of this on iOverlander was Forest with Cows.
Yes. So the other types of places we go to are forestry sites that are dispersed camping, and we can also use some rest stop areas if we need to.
And we also spend a lot of time out in the national monuments, especially the national monuments that are much more rural or in the wilderness, and there's often excellent dispersed camping out there.
Yes, and the national monuments are managed by BLM. So how do we find these locations, you might wonder? We tend to use a couple different methods. Our first method, which is usually most frequently used, is the application on the smartphone called iOverlander. And that's a database that's pretty much set up by other boondockers. So they visit a location, mark its GPS location, and give it a review. And there's usually some information about whether a place is big rig friendly, whether it's pet friendly, whether there's any cell phone service, and that sort of thing. So that's a really good way to find a boondocking site.
Now the problem with that, though, is that everybody else knows those boondocking sites exist. So they're often very popular and can at times of the year be very busy. So that's only one way we find sites. What's another way that we find sites?
So one of our other ways is that we'll visit the local U.S. Forestry office if they're open, and we'll stop in and talk with the forestry rangers and ask them if there are dispersed campsites within the forest area.
And one of the things you need to know there is you need to be very specific as to whether or not your vehicle can handle 4-wheel drive, extra high clearance. Sometimes the forestry ranger will think to ask you those things, sometimes they won't. Corinne and I, of course, have the good fortune of Red Rover being both 4-wheel drive and lifted. We're able to get out on some of the more challenging roads, and that can be very typical in forest land.
Now the other way that we use to find boondocking sites is with some Google Maps and Google Earth and other map-oriented programs where we can do an overview that shows where the federal lands are, and often we can discern whether or not they might have dirt roads or things like that where dispersed camping might be located.
Yeah, we recently downloaded the Gaia app, which is generally used by overlanders, but it has some wonderful features in terms of being able to download government lands, forestry lands, BLM lands, and it also will show you the roads and give you an indication of the type of road going up into those locations. So once you have that information, you can kind of make a decision as to whether you want to venture off and see if you'll find a campsite. The other way that we tend to find sites is, quite frankly, by going to a location that we want to be and simply taking the roads less known. It's not unusual. In fact, I don't think we've ever failed to find a pretty good boondocking site on government or national lands, government lands, BLM, forestry, that sort of thing, just literally heading off into the forest. Now, before you do that, the one thing you have to be careful of is, Corinne and I have been doing this for many, many years. We're very comfortable with getting off the main road. We're very comfortable with going on back roads, and sometimes they're cart paths. We've gotten to the point where we're fairly confident about what our skills are and what they're not. So it's pretty rare for us, like if we come across a spot where we're very uncomfortable, we simply don't go any further. And in fact, actually, as the road tends to become worse as you go, and I tend to start looking for a turnaround spot so that I don't have to back out too far if I find myself in a situation where I don't want to go any further. So those are some of the ways that we find boondocking sites. It's generally been pretty successful for us, and again, we have the good fortune that we have many years of experience. Hi folks, well, we're out for a little walk, and I thought while we were out here we'd talk a little bit about why we really like to boondock. So Corinne, what are the reasons that you like to boondock?
One of the reasons I enjoy boondocking is because you're not close to other campers like you would be in an RV park. And even if there's multiple boondocking sites in an area, you're usually quite dispersed from one another. So that makes it quite peaceful and enjoyable, and it gives you the sense of solitude.
It does give you a sense of solitude, and often you're going to be able to hear and see a lot more wildlife. So for instance, as the sun's been setting here, the coyotes have been calling off in the distance in front of us here, where, you know, if you're in a more established area, you might not get that opportunity.
Yep.
We've also, because we're out on open range land here, we're also hearing all of the cattle call to each other before the sun goes down, which is interesting. It's something you don't normally hear unless you happen to be out on the rangeland while it's happening.
Another thing I enjoy about boondocking is you're much more remote from towns and cities and communities, so you get to enjoy nature. And that goes with what Shawn's saying about hearing the animals out here, but it's also gives you much nicer views.
Yeah, we get so often the distance and where we're looking right now is a whole series of mountain ranges with snow on them. There's another set of beautiful rocks up behind us here. So we get a chance to actually really see and experience the wildlife, and also just the awesome nature that's part of where you happen to be camping. So what are some of the things that we don't like about boondocking, Corinne?
Well, if you are boondocking and the weather doesn't cooperate, it's sometimes hard on your batteries. We have solar power, and so if it's sunny, we can do quite a few days of boondocking without having to worry about it, without having to drive. But if the weather gets bad, then we're using up the power in our batteries, and if we're not driving, it's not recharging them.
And that can be a big problem because all our services for cooking and heat and that are all powered by electrical in some way. So that can make it unfortunate, and we don't carry a generator. We just choose not to. Some people do have generators, and they can sort of compensate for lack of sun. The other issue with boondocking is you have to be really aware of the weather. The road that we're on out here right now is deep sand, and it's kind of a clayey sand, and when it gets wet, it's almost impossible to drive on. It'll be very slick. You'll find that it'll get really deep really fast, so you could find yourself being in a situation where, you know, the right decision is to actually wait until the weather gets better, and sometimes that's hard to do if you need to be someplace. So that's something that we have to keep an eye on. So far we really haven't had any issues with respect to rain, although we have had an issue with respect to snow. Last winter we were out camping in the Sierras, the eastern Sierra Mountains, and actually got out in a snowstorm. We were camped, we were parked, but it was one heck of a snowstorm, so we had to drive out in the snow the next day. It wasn't a big deal, but it could have been. So it's something to definitely keep in mind.
Yeah. The other thing that you have to be aware of, just like power, is water. And you have to be aware of how much capacity you have in your water tank and how much capacity you have in a gray water tank so that you can store what you're using. And you're going to be very conscious of conserving water. So we tend to do more sponge baths rather than showers. I try and avoid any cooking that's going to use a lot of water, like making pasta or that type of dish.
Yeah, we're also very careful when we wash dishes and things of that sort. We have a 30-gallon tank. That actually lasts us about a week if we conserve the water fairly carefully. Others might do much better than us, but that tends to be our usage. Which kind of brings up another topic that I just sort of bounced into my head that's both a pro and a con. It really is important to understand how fast you use your resources. We've seen a number of folks get out into the boondocking areas and run out of water, run out of fuel, you know, things like that. And that's just inexperience and not really understanding how to manage your resources. You know, it's not unusual for Corinne and I to be out 30 or 40 miles into these backcountry roads, and you might be another 60 or 70 miles to the next gas station. And as it turns out, our truck, you know, gets about 14 miles to the gallon on the highway, but four-wheel drive up and down dirt roads, we get about 8. So all of a sudden our fuel mileage isn't all that great, and we go through a lot of fuel when we're out in the backcountry. And you know, we just need to keep that in mind.
Yep, it's all about management of resources.
So what are any other cons to boondocking?
I think the other thing can be awareness of the dirt roads and the quality of your vehicle for getting out on the roads. So just be aware that some of these spots have pretty gnarly roads. Others are quite reasonable, and I think that's the other reason that I find iOverlander helpful, is because someone's already driven out there and they usually tell you, yes, this was a good road, I could even do it in my low clearance vehicle, or they can say, no, this was definitely a four-wheel drive, or it was a very steep hill or something like that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that it was kind of a con for us is that we used to drive a C-Class motorhome, and you know, getting out on these big bumpy roads off of the main road, quite frankly, we were beating it to death. I mean, it was falling apart on us because it really couldn't take the vibration and that out in these back roads. So that's the other thing to kind of understand, is not only be prepared of what your vehicle can do, but also understand that there's going to be some wear and tear on your vehicle, especially when you're driving an RV. You know, these folks that are in that are taking, you know, Jeeps and Toyota Tundras and things of that sort with their tent on the top, you know, they're much better equipped to handle some of these backcountry roads. So one of the things that we read quite often in other vlogs and blogs is that a lot of people seem to be quite fearful of boondocking. You know, they're afraid of being out in the wilderness, they're afraid of being attacked, they're afraid of the animals, snakes, ticks, you name it, they're afraid of it. And all these things are possible, the reality is in 25 years of anchoring out and boondocking, we've never ever been even so much as approached with somebody that had malintent against us. Although from time to time we've had to deal with various animals, and in fact last night was a good example. After we'd fallen asleep, a local burro had wandered down the road and decided that he was going to start bellowing right behind the van. Well, as you might imagine, that woke us up, scared the heck out of us. But once we knew what it was kind of like, just ignore it and go back to sleep. So, you know, that's kind of how we react to these sorts of things now. Now, to be fair, when we went out our first time on our little boat and anchored out, every little creak, every little movement woke me up and I had to get up and look. And in fact, for several years, whenever I heard anything that it was the least bit unusual, I had to get up and look. But after a while, you start to recognize these noises, you start to get comfortable with the motion, and essentially, in fact, you actually start to expect those noises, and if you don't hear them, it wakes me up. So, you know, it's a case of getting experience and getting some practice. Now, one of the things that you can do is you don't have to go out and boondock in the wilderness to start off with. You know, boondocking might be at a Walmart. Boondocking might be at a Cracker Barrel. Boondocking might be at a Harvest Host or some similar type of place where you're simply off the use of electrical and sewer and things of that sort. You're unplugged. And it'll give you a chance to get used to the sounds and that of the night living on your rig. Now, in my opinion, I would much rather boondock out in the boonies. I feel safer out here than I do in a Walmart parking lot. I feel much more, I hear much more of the noises, and I'm more fearful in there than I ever am out here. But again, we have a lot of experience. We did it little by little. We got further and further out. And now for us, this is the norm as opposed to the, you know, unusual. So my best advice for folks that want to do this is start small, boondock a night, get used to the sounds of your rig, boondock 2 nights, 3 nights, and over time that experience will get you to a place where you're really going to enjoy the experience. So those are my thoughts on fear and sort of overcoming your fear. Hi folks, so Corinne and I are in the Bridger-Teton National Forest and a campsite up in the mountains. We're currently at about 8,200 feet, and if you have not actually spent any time at elevation, it can be quite difficult to actually get used to, especially the first few nights sleeping. I always have a very difficult time sleeping when we first get up into these high elevations. The other thing that I want to talk about is sort of how to recognize a national forest dispersed campsite. Sometimes it's pretty hard to recognize them, sometimes it's pretty easy. But one almost surefire sign is the fireplace. The term that the forestry department uses is a previously disturbed location. And it's almost a sure sign that it's been previously disturbed if there's a fire ring here. You'll see a couple different types of them. The one type you'll see that's very common will be a circle of stones laid out with a little bit of a clearing around it. The other type is occasionally the Forest Service will come out and they'll actually put in metal rings where they want you to camp in the dispersed areas. I don't see that as often, but in some states it's more common than not. So one of the other ways that we recognize a forestry dispersed camping location is the presence of either a small road or tire tracks that surround the area. You know, if you already see that there are tire tracks and that you can see that people have been there before, it's probably okay as a dispersed camping location. We got lucky this time in the sense that we didn't have to come in very far off the road to find this location, and it turns out it's absolutely beautiful. As you can see around me here, there are all kinds of spring flowers and things of that sort, and we try very hard not to disturb those when we're here. So we really try to keep our vehicle on the road or on the pad. It's actually also not unusual to actually see an area that if I walk over here, you know, our truck is parked on an area with less grass and dirt, and that's pretty typical of forest places. There'll be some kind of cleared area. Actually, you can see another spot over here that's been cleared, and that's also pretty typical. Now, the forest site we're in this time, they've been cutting slash and burning slash, so there's all kinds of burn areas all around us. They're not as pretty, but on the other hand, it kind of prevents really bad forest fires. So in addition to a good location, the way they often work, at least finding locations often works, is the main road in will be in usually pretty decent shape, sort of a quality that you can drag a trailer along. But here in Wyoming, we found that most of the actual campsites are on little roads that go off of the main road and then back a ways, usually about 50 to 100 feet from the main road. And those roads can be in variable condition. The road that we come in here, that we used to get in here, is, you know, pretty potholy, it's muddy, and it could be a challenge for vehicles that are, you know, a little less capable getting in. This is not particularly bad. This is a fairly typical entrance road we found. Good morning.
Good morning. We're having a nice, bright, sunny day today.
Yeah, we've had several rainy days in a row, and actually kind of that's one of the bummer parts about being boondocking. You know, you have to manage your resources, especially your electrical, if you're based on solar, which we are. But regardless of that, we're out here at Soda Lake. It's a wildlife management area not far from Pinedale, Wyoming.
And it's a beautiful spot. We wanted to show that you're not limited to just forestry spots or BLM spots that are out in the wilds with no water resources. Here's a case of a lovely lake. It's a favorite spot for local fishermen, and it's got a lot of nice dispersed campsites. Each campsite seems to be about a quarter to a half mile apart.
And each one seems to have a picnic bench and a fire ring. And in fact, some of them, where you've got kind of dual spots, you not only have a fire ring and a picnic table, but you also have a pit toilet.
Yeah, and the spaces here are big enough if you're camping as a family and you need 2 vehicles, or you're having a vehicle in tents. You've got lots of space to spread out here.
Right. The only downside to a place like this is that you really need to know the time of year you're going to be here, because this is sometimes closed because there are wild range animals that live in this area, including wild horses and deer, and a variety of other animals that I don't remember the names of right at the moment.
Pronghorns.
Pronghorns, that's the one.
Elks,
yeah. And elk. Yeah.
So just to keep in mind, there's more than just outdoor forest places. Well, we hope that this little video segment's shown you a good deal more about boondocking and the type of places you can go to, and given you some ideas to maybe try it.
Yes, we I've been doing this for a long time. We really love it. We noticed there's a lot more people out here in the last 5 or 6 years, so it has become more popular. But there still seems to be lots of ability to disperse and have really good camp locations that are out in the wilderness. And if it's something you're interested in, give it a try. Try it simply to start off with, and then it can get more complicated as you get more experienced.
And if you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up.
Yes, we really appreciate that. That really helps us out. And also, if you would please subscribe.
That would be very helpful to us. And if you want to know when new videos get posted, please punch that notification bell there.
Yes, and finally, as always, don't hesitate to write us a comment, a thought, an idea. We read them all, and so far we respond to all of them.
Thanks again.
Thanks again. Take
Bye
care,
for now.
and bye for now.